In this week's lesson, we're going to discuss in detail the types of figures of speech. As we ended last week's lesson, we talked about those 6 types, which include the figures of speech involving comparison, the figures of speech involving substitution, the figures of speech involving omission or suppression, the figures of speech involving overstatement or understatement, the figures of speech involving inconsistency, and the figures of speech involving sound. The first type of figure of speech that we want to begin to discuss is the types of figures of speech involving comparison. There are 3 types of figure of speech which involve comparison. The first one is the simile. This is a comparison in which one thing explicitly, by using the word like or as, resembles another. We see this in 1 Peter 1:24, where the scripture says, all men are like grass. This is a simile because comparison has the word like. All men are like grass. As opposed to a metaphor in comparison, the metaphor is a comparison in which one thing is, acts like, or represents another, in which the two are basically unalike. All flesh is grass, Isaiah 40:6. Notice that the word like or as is not in this one, so a metaphor is comparing flesh to grass, and they're not alike. So it's comparing two ideas that are unalike. Another figure of speech involving comparison is the hypocatastasis. This is a comparison in which the likeness is implied by a direct naming. Dogs have surrounded me. In other words, this is directly naming people as dogs. No like, no is. Psalm 22:16, the psalmist simply says, dogs have surrounded me. So a simile is, you wicked people are like dogs. The metaphor is, you wicked people are dogs. And hypocatastasis is, you dogs. You dogs. Another type of figure of speech is a figure of speech involving substitution. There are quite a few of these figures of speech involving substitution. First is the metonymy, the substituting of one word for another. Let's attack him with our tongues, Jeremiah said in Jeremiah 18:18. In other words, using the word tongues to substitute us attacking them with our words there. Another type of figure of speech involving substitution is the synecdoche. The substituting of part of something for the whole, or a whole or the part. Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken in all of the world. In Luke 2:10, this is substituting all the world for the census of Jerusalem and the area there that Caesar had issued the decree. Another figure of speech involving substitution is a merism. It is a form of synecdoche in which the totality or whole is substituted by contrasting or opposite parts. Psalm 139:2 says, you know when I sit and when I rise. There's 2 contrasting parts that are being compared there. In other words, you know when he's resting and when he's active. The hendiadys is the substituting of 2 coordinate terms joined by and for a single concept in which one of the elements defines the other. In other words, pain and childbearing means pain in childbearing. So in Genesis 3:16, when God gives the curse there, and he says you'll have pain and childbearing. What he means is your childbearing is going to involve pain. Another type of figure of speech involving substitution is the personification. This is the ascribing of human characteristics or actions to inanimate objects or ideas or to animals. In Isaiah 35:1, Scripture says, "The desert and the parched land will be glad." Well, these are the desert and the parched land is being compared and being compared there as being happy and glad. So these actions are being compared to a desert and a parched land. And anthropomorphism is the ascribing of human characteristics and actions to God, the hand of God, for instance. And anthropopathism is ascribing human emotions to God. God said, "I am very jealous for Zion," Zechariah 8:1. That's ascribing a human emotion, jealousy, to God. That's an anthropopathism. A zoomorphism is ascribing animal characteristics to God or to others. God will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. Psalm 91:4. An apostrophe is a direct address to an object as if it were a person, or to an absent or an imaginary person as if it were present. "Why was it, O sea, that you fled?" Psalm 114:5. In other words, he's actually talking to the sea like it's a person. The last figure of speech involving substitution is called a euphemism. This is the substituting of an inoffensive or mild expression for an offensive or personal one. For instance, when we're talking about death, we talk about kicked the bucket, or passed on, or he went home. The Bible speaks of death of Christians as falling asleep. The third type of speech is the figures of speech involving suppression. There are 4 of those types of figures of speech. The ellipsis is an omission of a word or words that must be supplied to complete the sentence grammatically. For instance, when 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 5 speaks of the 12, it means the 12 apostles. So it leaves out the word apostle, just says the 12. A zeugma is the joining of 2 nouns to one verb, when logically only one of the nouns goes with the verb. His mouth was opened and his tongue. So that is 2 nouns, talking about one thing there in Luke 1:64. An aposioposis is a sudden break in the sentence as if the speaker were not able to finish. "If thou wilt forgive their sin, and if not, blot me, I pray thee, out of thy book which thou hast written." In other words, right after Moses says, "If thou wilt forgive their sin," he doesn't finish. He just says, "and if you don't." That's in Exodus 32:32. Then there's the rhetorical question. This is a question which does not require a verbal response and is given to force the reader to answer in his mind and can consider the implications of the answer. "Is there anything too hard for me?" Jeremiah says. Jeremiah is quoting God in Jeremiah 32:27. Well, the answer is no, and it's a rhetorical question which is expecting the answer no. There's nothing too hard for God. Then there's the figures of speech involving overstatement and understatement. There are 4 of these types of figures of speech. Hyperbole is a deliberate exaggeration. "The cities are large and fortified to heaven," Deuteronomy 1:28. Well, clearly the cities aren't that big and aren't that large, so he's speaking in hyperbole. He's exaggerating, telling you how big the cities are. The litotes is an understatement or a negative statement to express an affirmation. When we say he's not a bad preacher, what we mean is he's a good preacher. So that's an understatement, affirming that he's a good preacher. Then we have irony, a kind of ridicule expressed indirectly in the form of a compliment. "How the king of Israel has distinguished himself today." 2 Samuel 6:20. This is where Saul's daughter, Michal, is speaking of David there when he's dancing. And of course, she's quite disgusted with David, but she says how the king of Israel has distinguished himself. So she's speaking in irony. She's not saying he distinguished himself. She's saying she embarrassed himself. But she's actually saying how the king of Israel has distinguished himself today. Then there's the pleonasm, a repetition of words or the adding of similar words, which in English seems redundant. I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, Job 42:5 says. Well, he said, I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear. That's just redundant. He's speaking again about the same thing. Then we have the figures of speech involving inconsistency. This is an oxymoron or a paradox. An oxymoron is the combining together of terms that are opposite or contradictory. The birth pains of death. Well, death and birth are two different things, and it's putting together these two things, speaking as an oxymoron to make a point in Acts 2:24. The paradox is a statement that is seemingly absurd or contrary to normal opinion. Whoever loses his life for me will save it. It's a paradox, losing the life and saving it. We see Jesus using a paradox in Mark 8:35. Then we have the types of speech involving sound. These involve a paranomasia, using the same words or similar sounding words to suggest different meanings. Follow me and let the dead bury the dead, Jesus said in Matthew 8:22. What he means there is let the spiritually dead bury the physically dead. So these are similar sounding words to suggest different meanings. Then we have the onomatopoeia, the occurrence of a word which by its very sound suggests its meaning. So we use words like boom, buzz, click, hiss, pow.